All right, so we'll say good morning. Let's begin. So today's daf is Ayin Daled 74. Actually, have a beautiful daf ahead of us today. So we are picking up at the two dots, Ayin Gimel Amud Beis 73b. So Chot Chet Elu Chai Bekrisos. Remember again, the Gemara is continuing on the drasha that we had from the pasuk yesterday. Chet Elu Chai Bekrisos. So the Gemara asks the kasha. So remember again, the model that the Gemara was espousing yesterday was the idea that whenever the individual has a chet maves, whenever ultimately there's a death penalty hanging over his head, by definition there is no financial liability. Another application of kimle. Another application of kimle b'derabamine. So first of all, our shir this morning is dedicated by Said and Sanhedrin in honor of the month, in honor of the Yomi Noram and Ksiv Chasim for all of Klal Yisrael, by Adam Yudit Ben Zev, who are dedicating the month of Tishrei, and by Mr. Isaac Samuel dedicating the month of Tishrei, the Talmud Torah in memory of his beloved wife Esther Basarav Yerachmiel Chaim Cohen. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, her neshama will have an aliyah. So the Gemara says, "Ve'elu naro sheish len kinas." These are the girls. If you violate them, there is a penalty. Haba alachoso. So we'll say ultimately again, one of the examples is someone who has relations with his sister. So remember again, having relations with one's sister is punishable by misa. Yet the Gemara is still saying that the offender, right? The offender is still chayiv in mamon. So you see from here that even when you're chayiv in misa, you'll still be chayiv in mamon. To which the Gemara says, Amra Rabbana Kamid Rav Chisda Mishas Ha'ara de Pagma. Iftarli miktala mimamona lo mishalim. Iftarli miktala mamona lo mishalim ad gimar bia. To which the Gemara essentially says, Rabbosai, that the liability occurs at two different times. When is he poging her? He's poging her at the beginning of the bia. At that point in time, where there is no financial liability, as opposed to Gimar Bia, by the end of the Bia, where there is a financial liability. So what the Gemara is saying over here is that the Isurim come at two different times, right? The din of Mammon comes at the end of the Bia, versus, again, the Pegam, right? Or the Isur of incest becomes already at the beginning of the Bia. So that makes sense according to the opinion who says that hara is the touching of the male and female reproductive organs. But according to the opinion that says that hara is literally what? Penetration. So then what is there to say? I will say that would appear then that the Isser and the Mammon come at the same time. To which the Gemara says, Ela amrav chista kigon shebala shelo kidarka v'chazer v'ba'ubala kidarka. Rather, we'll say, what's the case? The case is where the first bia was shelo kidarka, and that's where there'll be the chi of misa. Then the second time, ultimately, again, there'll be a chi of mammon. Rava Amar b'manichasa shelo yihargena. Rava says, what's the case? The case is where the sister is being attacked by the brother, and she tells others who stands ready to help her not to step in. Leave him alone because I don't want him to kill me. Rabbi Yehudi, and this reflects Rabbi Yehuda, both say top of Ayin Daled. Rabbi Papa says, B'mafuta v'divrei hakol. Rabbi Papa says, we're talking about over here. Remember, this is Rabbi Yehuda from yesterday's daf. Rabbi Yehuda from yesterday's daf holds that if a woman says, leave the attacker alone, and just let him attack me, that we listen to her because we understand that she is fearful of being killed. Rabbi Papa says, top of Ayin Daled, B'mafuta v'divrei hakol. Papa says, what are we talking about over here? We're talking about a case of mafuta. But a case of mafuta is where the woman was seduced. In a case of mafuta, ultimately, again, she is complicit in this act. And therefore, again, if she is complicit in this act, we have no right to kill the individual, to quote-unquote save her. If we have no license to kill her, then by definition, he will be chayiv in mammon. Abaye says, so Abaye says, what's the case over here? Because the case over here is where we could save the woman by injuring the attacker in one of his limbs. In other words, we don't have to kill him in order to save her. So the Gemara is suggesting over here something very interesting. That first of all, two things. Number one, whenever you have the ability to save someone by injuring the attacker, that is halachically preferable. I'm okay, great thing. Thank you. But whenever you could save the potential victim from harm by wounding the attacker, that becomes the obligation. And number two, will say, remember, if it's a case where the victim could be saved by only wounding the attacker, then this is no longer a case of dinei nefashis. If it's no longer a case of dinei nefashis, then what? Then the attacker will be chayiv financially. So the Gemara says over here, Rabbi Yonasan ben Shali, the Sanya, Rabbi Yonasan ben Shalomer, Rodev, Sherodev achar chavero hargo, v'yachol lahatzilo bechmei barav. Supposed to say, if Reuven's running after Shimon to kill him, and I see that I can injure Reuven, right? I can injure Reuven in a way that ultimately, again, will allow Shimon to escape, but doesn't require me to take Reuven's life, then that is my obligation. And what happens in the event, v'lo hitzil? I will say, what happens if at the end of the day, I choose not to injure Reuven, instead what? I kill him, then neherag alav. I will say, I am chayiv misa. In other words, the idea, now obviously this is a very specific case where everything lines up in a way where it's clear that if I injure him, that halacha l'maisa, again, it will neutralize the threat. If I know I can injure him, and I have the ability to control, I guess, the makkah that I'm going to give to Reuven, and I can injure him, but instead I kill him, I am liable to a death penalty. Rabbi Elazar, because the pasuk over here is speaking about two men who are fighting. V'nagvu ishahara. One of them bumps into or tramples upon a pregnant woman, and as a result, she miscarries. So the Torah speaks about again that there's liability for that. So the Gemara darshans that pasuk. So the Gemara says, "V'kri natzu anashim." Rabbi Elazar b'mitzvos shebemisa kosov medaber. The Torah is speaking about a situation. Ultimately, again, I will say where someone could have been killed in order to stop them from harming the other. Dichsiv, ve'im ason yihya, v'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh. Because the pasuk explicitly says that if there's a tragedy, you will pay one life for the other. So what the Gemara understands over here is that this situation, as much as it's two people fighting with each other, at the end of the day, there is the capacity, ultimately, again, to kill someone. There's the capacity for someone to be killed. And therefore, what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, v'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh, afilu haki. Nevertheless, amar achmana, v'lo yihya ason, anoshi anesh. Supposed to listen to how the Gemara is darshan this. The Gemara says, v'lo yihya ason, which means, don't kill him if you don't need to kill him. Instead, just injure him, neutralize the threat. V'lo yihya ason, right? No need to take the killer's life if it's not necessary. I should say, no need to take the pursuer's life if it's not necessary. Rather, anosh ye anesh. And we'll say, the great Gemara's darshan in this over here is anosh ye anesh means, if you could have neutralized the threat by simply injuring the pursuer, but instead what? You choose to kill him, you, now the killer of the pursuer, will be chayav for that. So the Gemara says, so say, if you tell me the halacha is that when you could save the victim by injuring the pursuer, and you don't do so, that halacha l'maisa, again, you are chayiv for that. So the Gemara says, then Rabbi said, now I understand what the pasuk is talking about, where it says that I can be punished. Kigon, what's the case where I? Rabbi, remember, who am I? I'm the person who's stepping in to try to save the victim. When is there a case where I, the Good Samaritan, who's stepping in to try to save the victim, when would there be a situation where I would be chayiv? Kigon, shiyachol hotzel be'echad me'avar. We'll say, what would be the case? We'll say, first wide line. Where would be a case where I could save the victim by injuring the pursuer in one of his limbs, and I don't do so. If instead I kill him, the Torah is telling me that's what? There's liability for that. So I said, but if you tell me that even if at the end of the day I could have saved the victim by injuring the pursuer in one of his limbs, but instead I killed the pursuer, and you're going to tell me that even in that case I'm going to be pater, then I will say, what's the case of the pasuk when it says that sometimes I could be punished for taking the life of the pursuer? To which the Gemara says, Dilma shani hachsa hasam. Shani hacha the misa lazeh v'tashlumin lazeh. I will say maybe this case is different because if also remember again in this unique pasuk there are actually two individuals ultimately again who are hurt. So remember again, so it could be that Reuven is killing one person, but in the course of this tussle, he's bumping into the pregnant woman and causing her to miscarry. So it could be that there's a din misa towards one person. In other words, that Reuven was ready to kill Shimon. The pregnant woman was the unintended victim of this situation. So therefore, again, it could be that Reuven is going to be chayiv misa for Shimon, but ultimately, again, he would be chayiv mamon for the woman. So also remember, going back for just a moment, what we're really trying to figure out is in a case where someone else is attacking someone in a way that would make them chayiv misa, would they also be chayiv mamon? The Gemara is trying to bring this as a raya, but then the Gemara says maybe not. Maybe over here the difference is that the liability goes in two different directions to two different people, to which the Gemara says, Loshna. You can't make a distinction because we don't look ultimately again at where the liability goes. Rather, what do we look at? Who a person is liable to. The Amar Rava said, Rodev Shai Rodev Achar Chavero. So listen to this. Reuven was running after Shimon. Now presumably to kill him. Now what happened? Vishiber esakelim. And while the Rodev is running after the Nirdaf, so while the pursuer is running after the victim, the pursuer ends up breaking utensils. So we'll say, so what's the Shaila? Is the Rodev chayiv for the breakage of those utensils? To which the Gemara says, Bein shal nirdaf, bein shal kol adam pater. No. Well, it's actually very interesting. If as the Rodev is running after the nirdaf, Reuven is running after Shimon to kill him, and Reuven tramples utensils, whoever those utensils belong to, right? Ultimately, again, Reuven is going to be pater. Why? My taima mischayiv b'nafshohu. They say, why is that? That is because Reuven is chayiv misa. So we'll say, why is Reuven chayiv misa? Because Reuven is actively running after Shimon to kill him. Reuven is a Rodev. So because Reuven is a Rodev, he's chayiv misa. Because he's chayiv misa, then what? He's going to be pater on the kalim that he breaks. Right? He's going to be pater. There's no din mamon when there's a din misa. However, on the other hand, the nirdav sheshibra as hakilim. But I will say, if let's say the person being pursued, we'll call him Shimon, is running away from Reuven, and he breaks utensils, so shall Rodev pater. If he breaks the utensils, ultimately again of the Rodev, he's going to be pater. Shall kol adam chayiv. But if he breaks utensils of other people, then ultimately he will be chayiv. So the Gemara says, shall Rodev pater. Why is it ultimately again that he's chayiv for breaking the utensils of the Rodev? Pater for breaking the utensils of the Rodev. Shelo yehi mamono chaviv alav migufo. Because we'll say ultimately again, the Rodev's money shouldn't be more important to him than his body. In other words, by running after Shimon, ultimately again, he's putting himself in harm's way because now anyone has the right to kill him. Says Mammon cannot be more chamer than his guf. So therefore, again, the same way that everyone has the license to go out and take his life in order to save Shimon, so too again, when the Nirdav tramples his kalim, he's going to be pater for that as well. However, again, shall call Adam chayiv. But I will say, can you imagine this case? So this is Reuven's running after Shimon. Shimon's running away from Reuven. Shimon, while he's running away, breaks Levi's utensils. What the Gemara is saying over here is that Shimon is going to be chayiv for that. He's going to be chayiv. Why? Because we'll say ultimately again, it's actually a very important yesod. You can't save yourself through your friend's money. Or I should say, you can't save yourself through your friend's money, but what? You have to pay. So we'll say, so if Shimon is running away from Reuven, and he accidentally breaks, or intentionally, he starts throwing Levi's kalim, right, at Reuven to stop Reuven from running after him. So ultimately, again, he's saving himself with someone else's money. He has to pay for that. V'rodev shei rodev achar rodev latzilo. So listen to this. I'm sorry. I lost the place. V'rodev shayarodev achar chavero lahotzilo. So listen to this. So I see Reuven running after Shimon to kill him. I start running after Reuven to kill Reuven to stop him from killing Shimon. V'shibra sakelim. And in the course of me running after Reuven, who is the Rodev, I end up smashing utensils. Bein shal Rodev, bein shal nirdaf, bein shal kol adam. Whoever's utensils, I go ahead and I break. I'm going to be pater. Why is that? I will say, The truth is, that's not really the technical letter of the law. Shim ata omer kain nimtza ein lecha adam shematzil es chaveru miyad harodef. So the Gemara makes a very interesting statement. The Gemara says it has to be that way. Why? Because I will say, if I know that by acting as a good Samaritan, there's going to be financial liability. Right? That's telling me again, I see Reuben running after Shimon, and therefore again, I want to step in, I want to kill Reuben and prevent him from harming Shimon, but I have to figure out, you know what, I have to run through this one's yard and that one's yard, and there was just here and there was just there, and it's going to end up costing me $1,000 to go ahead and save Shimon. What do I say to myself? I don't like Shimon that much, he's a nice guy, but I don't have the money for that. Therefore, we'll say, this is like one of these tikkun olam ideas. We'll say, where you see a similar concept? You see it, at least in halacha. I think, contemporary malpractice law might be a little bit different, but halacha shields doctors. So halacha says that if a doctor comes to a scene and a doctor goes ahead and helps someone, a doctor cannot be found liable for any type of damages that he does. If there's gross negligence, and I say it's not just negligence, it's gross negligence, then halacha l'maisa again, so there could be some liability. But in the absence of gross negligence, even if there are mistakes, the doctor is covered by halacha. We will say the same logic. The reason for that is because otherwise people won't want to help. Halacha understands that the only way people will help is if there is protection from legal recourse. But if every single time I step in to help something, someone could sue me, or there's damages, then the halacha understands people aren't going to want to help. The Gemara goes weiter. Aval. Harodef achara behema. But remember again, we learned that if somebody's running after an animal to go ahead and commit an act of bestiality, we don't kill the individual. Tanya Rashbi Omer, ha'ovid avodos kochav nitlatzil b'nafsho. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says it's not true. If we see someone about to worship idolatry, we kill them to save them from violating that avera. Mikal v'chomer. So we'll say, what's the kal v'chomer? Uma pegam hedyot nitlatzil b'nafsho. Pegam gava lo ka'oshkin. We'll say, if I could kill someone for preventing him from violating a nara ha'me'urasa, which is what we call a pegam hedyot. We'll say pegam hedyot means he's hurting an ordinary individual. And if he's going to hurt HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, by worshipping Avodah Zarah, alachas kama v'kama, that I have the right to step in and to kill him. I v'chi onshin min adin. But do we have the ability to go ahead and kill someone based on a kal v'chomer? Kasavra onshin min adin. Yes, I will say this opinion holds that you can't punish and you can't administer a punishment based on a kal v'chomer. Tanya, Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon Omer. Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon says, "Amachalas Shabbos nitlatzil b'nafsho." But it's actually pretty wild. Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon says, if I see someone about to machal Shabbos, I could kill them to prevent them from doing so. We'll say, remember again, by killing them to prevent them from doing so, at the end of the day, that's a schus for them, right? I'm preventing them from violating an incredible aveira. I'm sorry. So we're going to talk about that. So Savar la ka'avua. So we'll say he holds like his father. The Amar Onshin min Hadin, who says, I will say that you could derive punishments, even capital punishments, from a kal v'chomer. V'asya Shabbos chilu me'avodas kochavim. And I will also make a gzer shav of chilu between Shabbos and avodas kochavim, just like we just said, that you could kill someone to prevent them from worshipping idolatry. You could also kill someone from preventing them from being a machal Shabbos. So we'll say they came to a conclusion about this in Lud. We'll say this is a very important sugya. We'll say if they threaten a person and they say to a person with any avera in the Torah, either commit this avera or we'll kill you. What's the halacha? We'll say you commit the avera. You commit the avera chutz me'avodas kochavim v'gilei arayos u'shvichus torah. We'll say with three exceptions, the three cardinal averos. If somebody tells me chas v'shalom to worship idolatry or engage in immorality or engage in an act of bloodshed, then what? What's the halacha? The halacha is I have to sooner give my life than to violate it. So the Gemara says, "V'avodas kochavim lo." Is that true that you have to give your life rather than worship idolatry? V'tanya, we learned Amrei b'shma minayishim Amrei lo adam avod avodas kochavim v'alti hareg minayin shiyavor v'ayi hareg. Well, so how do we know that if they threatened the person, they told him either worship idolatry or we'll kill you? How do we know that he has to worship the idolatry and not let himself be killed? So the pasuk says, Talmud Lomar v'chai bohem Below sheyamus bahem. Rabbi say the pasuk says that you shall live through them. Moshe wants us to live and not to die. So therefore, again, you see that you could even worship idolatry to save your life. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Yachal afilu befarhesya. You might have thought, Rabbi said, that this is even true in public. In other words, let's say somebody tells me to worship idolatry in public or they're going to kill me. I would have thought that, again, Chayban tells me I could even worship. Talmud Lomar, v'lo sechalu Hashem kodshi v'nikdashti. Therefore, I will say, the pasuk says, Rebbe Shalom says, do not go ahead and profane my name. So we'll say, at the end of the day, so we'll say, we don't paskin this way. We paskin that avodah zarah is one of the 3 cardinal averos for which you have to give your life. Right? And if a person, now again, the scope of that, when that is, what's considered avodah zarah, so that there's a lot of halachic literature, not a topic for today. This other opinion, however, that says that no, even idolatry you can worship rather than give your life also has limitations. For example, if this act of idolatry is going to happen in public, befarhesya, then there's not just avodah zarah, then there's chil Hashem, desecration of God's name. When there's a desecration of God's name, you certainly have to give your life rather than worship. So the Gemara says, Inu d'amar Rebbe Elazar, he holds like Rebbe Elazar, Desanya, Rebbe Elazar, Amar v'yehavtas Hashem alkecha b'chol levavecha b'chol nafshecha b'chol maldecha. We'll say beautiful Gemara, you have to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all of your heart, all of your soul, and chol ma'odecha. And we'll say, for our purposes right now, ma'odecha means with all of your means. With all of your means, with all of your money. In Nemar b'chol nafshecha b'chol maldecha. If it's already told me that I have to love God with all of my life, which presumably means what? That I have to stand ready to even give up my life for God. So if Torah already told me that, then why does it have to say with all of my money? To which the Gemara says, we'll say, so some people, life is more important than their money. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you have to love me with all of your heart. Which means that even Chas Hashem, if you have to give your life for me, you have to stand ready to do so. But there are some other people whose money is more important to them than their life. And therefore, again, the Torah says, ultimately, again, with all of their money. So we'll say, you see from here, the point of bringing down this thing, besides the fact that it's beautiful, is that from B'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, we also learn that love of God means, Rashi says, that you may not switch HaKadosh Baruch Hu with any other deity. So from here we would also see that Avodah Zarah is a Yeharik Val Yavar. So just an interesting machlokes, whether everybody seems to agree on Gilei Arayos and Shlichus Damim, the machlokes about Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara goes right to Gilei Arayos Shlichus Damim, Ked Rebbe. So we'll say, where do we learn out Gilei Arayos Shlichus Damim? We learn from Rebbe Kisanya, Rebbe Omer, Ki Kasha Yakum Isharei Uvaratz Chol Nefesh. We'll say the pasuk says, just like a man will rise up against another one and murder him. So the pasuk says, right, and murder him. So the Gemara says, Kain had davar hazeh, v'chimala manu miratzech. So we'll say, what are we learning out from this case of the murderer? Me'ata harizeh balalamid v'nim salaman. We'll say, it turns out that this came to teach us something, but we end up ultimately again learning something. Makish rotzech lenara. We'll say, we're going to compare the rotzech to the nara murasa. Ma nara murasa nitzatzila benafsho. We'll say, just like we know that in order to save the nara murasa from being violated, you could kill the offender, right? You could kill the perpetrator. So therefore, again, af rotzeach nitzatzila benafsho. We'll say, so to a rotzeach, you can go ahead and you can kill him in order to prevent him from going ahead and committing the act. Umakish nara muras l'rotzeach. And I learn out now. I compare nara muras to rotzeach also. Ma rotzeach yarek v'yavar. I will say just as an act of murder is yarek v'yavar. If somebody tells me chas v'shalom, either kill Ruvain or I'll kill you, I have to sooner give my life than take the life of another. Af na'araham me'urasa. Therefore, I will say, so too what? So too, if a woman is going to be violated, or if a man is forced to violate Nara Murasa, which I will say is an act of adultery, I have to sooner give my life than commit that act. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. Rotzeach gufe minalan. You just made a statement that murder is Yeharik Val Yavor. Where do you know that from? Where do you know that from? That I have to sooner give my life than take the life of another. So the Gemara says, Svarahu. It's actually, this is amazing. It's actually a svara. What's the svara? Tahuda asla kamei Rava Amrli Mar Doroi. So we'll say there was a man who came before Rabba, and he said to Rabba, Mar Doroi. We'll say the local governor said to me, Zil katli laplanya, vilo katlina lacha, vilo katlina lacha. The governor said to me, he said to me, go and kill Reuben, and if you don't kill Reuben, I'm going to kill you. What did Rabbi say to this man? Amarle liktelach v'lo sikto. You have to let yourself be killed. Do not chas v'shalom kill someone. Mi yemar didama didach sumak tvei. Dilma dama dehu gavra sumak tvei. Who says that your blood is redder? Maybe the other guy's blood is redder. So we'll say Rabbi says essentially it's svara. What license does one person have to take the life of someone else in order to preserve his own? Lo shanu, ela shlo b'shas gzeras hamalchus. We'll say, when do we say that in general? We'll say, so the Gemara made a statement before, and the statement was that in general, if somebody tells you, violate a particular avera, or I'm going to kill you, then what's the halacha? You violate. Okay, there are three exceptions, machlokus about avodah zarah, but that's the general rule. That's the general rule. So we'll say, so where do I know that from? Where do I know that in general, again, the Gemara said, v'chai b'hem, but the Gemara says, let's analyze this. Where do we know that in general, if somebody tells you to violate an avera, you do so, and it's what we call ya'avor va'al yeharig. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. So Rav Dimi, who subscribes to this idea, that in general, by all the other averos, we say ya'avor va'al yeharig. How do I know that there are exceptions to that rule? Lo shanu ela shlo b'shas gzeras malchus. Aval b'shas gzeras malchus, afilu mitzvah kala yeharig va'yavar. Now we'll say, when is that true? That is true when there's not a gzeras malchus. So we'll say, when the Gentile government is actively launching a campaign to undermine Yiddishkeit, so then Rabbi will say, that's called shas gzeras malchus. At a time like that, I have to give my life even for a mitzvah kala. In other words, when it's clear that there's a coordinated attack against my religion, and these things are unfolding on a governmental level, I have to give my life rather than violate even the smallest of mitzvos. So the Gemara says, yeharig va'al yavar ki asa Rabbi Yochanan filu shlo b'shas gzeras malchus lorma elo b'tzina. Furthermore, again, I will say another qualification. Rabbi Yochanan says, when we said that in general we hold ya'avor ve'al yeharig by mitzvos kalos, so we'll say that's only true. That's only true. B'tzina, that's only true where you're violating these averos in private. Aval b'farhesia, but I will say to violate even a quote unquote small avera, even at a time where there's not governmental persecution, is going to be asra. Afilu mitzvah kali yeharig val yavar. I will say, if I'm being forced to violate in public, even if it's not a time of gzeras malchus, and even if it's just an avera kala or mitzvah kala, I still have to go ahead and give my life. Yeharig va'al yavar. So says, by the way, my mitzvah kala, the Gemara keeps using this term of a mitzvah kala. What's a mitzvah kala? Amarav Rav Yitzchak Amarav afilu l'shanuye arkisa demasana. Even if the Ovdei Kochavim are getting me to try to change my shoelace. We'll say, what does that mean? So let's say again, Gentiles wear one kind of shoelace. Jews wear a different kind of shoelace. So again, that's a mitzvah kala. Under normal circumstances, the Gentile comes over to me and says, change your shoelace, I'm going to kill you. I say, okay, right? Okay, yeah, I'll change my shoelace. And we'll say, so again, what the Gemara is saying over here is the following. If it's clear that this is part of a systematic approach to undermine Yiddishkeit, then I have to give my life for it. I can't participate in anything that is part of a systematic undermining of Yiddishkeit. And number two, if the Gentile is going to make a public display of this, look, the Jew is willing to change his shoelace to yield to the Gentile, and the Bible said this is taking place by farhesia, even though again this is a mitzvah kala, the Gemara is suggesting ultimately again that I have to give my life. Now obviously in the farhesia piece, and also in the systematic piece, they become elements of chil Hashem associated with this. The kama farhesia, so it says the Gemara, by the way, how much is public? Right? What's the definition of farhesia? What's the definition of public? So Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yochanan, ein farhesia b'chusim me'asara b'nei adam. I will say, so farhesia is 10 people. Pshita Yisraelim Bayina. And I will say, this goes against, by the way, every single piece of instruction we all received before any school trip. Right? I will say, so right, if you went to any, right, self-respecting yeshiva. So what happened before you went on a school trip? What was the speech? I don't know, maybe you went to different yeshivas. Right? Don't make a chil Hashem. Right? That was always, don't make a chil Hashem. Right? People are going to see you. We're going out amongst other people. It's not in the yeshiva. Don't make a chil Hashem. So just so you understand, the point was well taken, but halachically inaccurate. On a technical level, Chil Hashem is a din by Jews. Chil Hashem is not a din by non-Jews. So when we see over here that if a Gentile is trying to go ahead and get me to change something in my Yiddishkeit, even in Mitzvah Befarhesia, Farhesia means in front of 10 other Jews. Pshita Yisraelim ba'ina dichsev, v'nikdashti b'sof b'nei Yisrael, because also the pasuk says, I will be sanctified within the midst of the Jewish people. Alright, I'm sorry. Actually, we'll say we're going to see there's Gzeir Shava. Nikdash, this pasuk by itself doesn't help me. It just, this pasuk talks about the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, and by extension, the Isra of Chil Hashem. We're going to make the drush of Toch in just a little bit. What happens if you have 9 Jews and 1 non-Jew? Could that form a proper quorum for Chil Hashem purposes? Tashma Detani Rabbi Yanai, Achud Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, Asya Toch. We also make a Gzeir Shav of Toch. Ksif Hacha, V'nikdashti B'soch B'nei Yisrael. So it says over here, I will be sanctified in the midst of the Jewish people. Uksiv Hasam, Hibadlu Mitoch Ha'ida Hazos. So it says by Korach, it says Kashmav says to Moshe Rabbeinu, separate yourself from this Eidah. Right? So Gzeir Shav of Toch. Ma lahalon asara v'kuli Yisrael. Both said just like now. Again, I'll just tell you one other interesting thing. There's one more piece of this Gzeir Shav the Gemara brings on elsewhere. The Gemara then makes a second part of this Gzeir Shav of Eidah from Korach to the Meraglim. And just like by the Meraglim, Eidah represents 10. So too again, Eidah represents 10. And so you have a twofold. It's Toch Eidah. Ma lahalon asara v'kuli Yisrael. Just like over there, it was 10, and they were all Jews. Afkon asara v'kuli Yisrael. Therefore, I will say by the Dashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael, it was also what? 10, and they were all Jews. So we'll say, so again, and that indeed is halacha l'mais. Just you shouldn't, well, I don't want to tell you the halacha l'mais yet, because we still have more to do. But again, even if you hold that you have to give up your life for a mitzvah kala, that you're being forced to go ahead and perform or to violate bifarhesia, farhesia means 10 Jews. So the Gemara will say, this is such an incredible sugya. How Esther farhesia havi. 1 second. But how was Esther Hamalka permitted to go ahead and live with Achashverosh? We'll say, was this not a public display of arayos? Remember again, everyone knew why a woman was taken to the palace, and everyone knew what was happening between Esther and Achashverosh when she was his wife. Is that not Gilei Arayos? Is that not ultimately, again, immorality? And Esther, essentially what the Gemara is saying over here is, why didn't Esther give her life? Why didn't Esther give her life? To which the Gemara said this, and by the way, this sugya, Nebuch, has such incredible halacha l'maisa applications throughout the years. There's an incredible Tosas here, which we're not going to get to today. No, we're not going to get to it today. But you'll look at it on your own. So the Gemara says, Amar Abai, the Gemara gives 2 answers. Number 1, Esther Karka Olam Haisa. Esther was passive in the act of relations. Now, both say, now what does that mean? So this is an incredible use of what Abai is saying is the following. When do we say Yeharig Va'al Yavor? When do we say Yeharig Va'al Yavor? When by giving up your life, you will not have to perform the act. So if someone comes over to me and says, Silver, kill Reuven or I'm going to kill you. And I say no. So we'll say, by saying no and refusing, then what? That prevents the act from materializing. Then at the end of the day, the act does not go forward. If halacha l'maisa, the act is going to happen anyway, then as long as I'm not active in the act, I am not chayiv to give my life. So what Abaye says is that if somebody threatens a woman with immorality, she could say no all she wants. He can violate her. So because he can violate her, therefore what? She's not mechuyeves to give up life. So when Abaye says Esther Karka Olam Haisa, it means she was passive in the act. I will say, by the way, the Mefurish Raya to this is in the Megillah. Remember again the most dramatic part of the Megillah when Mordechai says to Esther, what? You have to go to the king. You have to go to the king. And what does Esther say? Read it into Levecha. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? So Pasha Pshat, she's saying, I wasn't invited to the king. I'm going to go ahead and potentially be killed. The Gemara says, remember again, there's a machlokes about the nature of the relationship between Mordechai and Esther. So some say that Esther was Mordechai's wife. This whole time there's the possibility of reunification because she's Karka Olam. She's essentially again being violated. Therefore, again, it's not a rayos. So she says, my dear husband, I'll do this to save Klal Yisrael, but you understand that if I initiate contact now with him, this becomes arayos. And once it becomes arayos, I become usher to you through this act of adultery, which, by the way, is a different discussion. That Esther Amalka is the paradigmatic example of an Aveira Lishma, which, again, don't try this at home. Do not try this at home. But again, there is a concept like this of an Aveira Lishma, specifically in situations, ultimately, again, of Hatzalah for Klal Yisrael. We see it by Esther Amalka. We saw it again by the Haftarah on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, by Yael and Sisra. We see this concept. So the Gemara says over here, why wasn't Esther Mechuyeves to give up her life for the act of Arayos? Because she was Karka Olam. Rava says, Hanoas Atzman Shiny. So we'll say this is actually amazing. Rava says, it's also different. When do we say that a person has to give up their lives, ultimately again for these Averos? When there's a clear desire on behalf of the person who's forcing me to do these things to try to go ahead and get me to violate the tenets of my religion. But when there's not really a religious battle over here, there's just desires at play, then what? Then I'm not mechuyev to give up my life. So Rava suggests over here, Achashverosh, if you look at Rashi Anos Atzmo, Shino bekochav miskavin la'aviro miros, el la'anos Atzmo miskavin shiny, ben kan chel Hashem narikach. So we'll say, Achashverosh's intention with Esther Amalka was not to go ahead and get her to violate her Judaism. Remember again, he doesn't even know who she is. So Lamais again, what's at play over here? His desires are at play. When there's not, when forcing me to commit an Aveira is not there to get me to override my religious sensitivities, then Lamais again, Rava suggests one is not mukhayit to give up their life. Now, interestingly enough, Rava gives examples of this. Because if you don't hold this way, Hani kavaki vidimonki hechi avinaluhu. Rava says, so apparently Rashi points out that the Persians used to have a yomtiv in their Bate Kinesios, where what? They would go home to home collecting lamps, like lanterns, and you'd have to donate a lantern that they would place in their house of Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, how were the Jews permitted to participate in that collection? Aren't they contributing to Avodah Zarah? To which the Gemara says, Ela hanos atzman shayni. Here's the thing, the Persians weren't trying to get the Jews to convert. Rather, what did they want? They just wanted the lantern. They wanted the lamps. Meaning, they didn't want to have to spend all of the money on providing all of the lamps. So they figured, just get it from the Jews. But there was no concentrated effort of getting the Jews to convert. Therefore, again, there's no need to give a halchanami anos atzman shayni. Let's listen to this. With this, we'll stop. Da'amar Rava akum da'amar le'lahay Yisrael katul aspasta b'shabsa b'shadu l'chiyusu. Let's listen to this. If an akum, a Gentile, says to a Jew, cut down this aspasta. We'll say aspasta is a plant. Cut down this plant on Shabbos and feed it to the animals. So we'll say, so obviously this is under the threat of death. So the Gentile's telling me, if I don't cut down the plant, which is an Isser D'Oraisa on Shabbos, he's going to kill me. But he's telling me to cut it down and to feed it to the animals. So what's the halacha, Rabbi say? If you don't do it, ultimately again, I'm going to kill you. Right? I'm going to kill you. So what's the halacha, Rabbi say? I'm sorry. Liktil below likdelay. Ultimately again, cut it down. Right, cut it down, and don't allow yourself to be killed. So, right, we're going to see a distinction in just a moment. Shadi lenara. Let's say the Gentile tells me what? Cut down the asbestos and throw it into the river. Then what? Likdelei below likdol. Ultimately, in that case, I have to allow myself to be killed and not cut down the asbestos. We'll say, what's the difference in these two cases? My taima lavure milsakai. We'll say, what's the chilik? You see, when the Gentiles tell me to cut down the asbestos and feed it to his animal, what's his motivation? Right, for his animal. He doesn't want to do the work. So he happens to have a Jew at his disposal. He'll take advantage of the Jew. It's my Shabbos. The Gentile doesn't care so much about that. But it's clear that he's utilizing me in a way that benefits him. Hanas Atzman. Mashakin, if he tells me to go and cut down the asbestos and throw it into the river, then his intention is what? His intention is to get me to violate the tenets of my faith. Oh, that you want to do? That I can't allow. So I will say, so therefore again, we begin to see over here, so I'm going to stop over here, but I will say what we begin to see over here is the following. Number one, three averos that are Yeharik Val Yavor. We have a machlokes about Avodah Zarah. Normally, mitzvos kalos you could violate, you don't have to give your life. We see exceptions to that if it's farhesya, or if it's clear that the intention is to get the Jew to violate the tenets of his faith. We now begin to see major exceptions, that even with the Gimel Chamuros, I will say, if either, like in a case of Arayos, is Karka Olam, Tosfos points out, obviously Karka Olam only works for a woman, Karka Olam does not work for a man, but at least by Arayos, when it comes to so a woman could potentially save her life by being passive in the act of Arayos, and Hanas Atzman, if it's clear that the purpose of the Gentile is not to make me violate the tenets of my faith, but instead is his own benefit, then Allah L'maisa would appear that in those cases we would not say Yahareg Val Yavar. So we'll stop over here. We'll pick up with Boi tomorrow. Bo